When a person dies and reaches the end of their life, the soul ascends to the Creator, glorified and exalted, while the body remains here forever, devoid of any function or movement. The eyelids cannot even blink. Such is the condition of the deceased. The physical connection is completely severed upon death. Yet, how does it feel when a person is buried or placed in a morgue while still alive? The body, thrown into a grave or a mortuary fridge, tries with all its might, pushing against the morgue door or coffin lid, striving to return to life. Uncle Atiya's family couldn't believe he had passed away. Just yesterday, he was taken to the hospital because he was experiencing chest pains, and today, the hospital informs them of his actual death. At 55 years old, Uncle Atiya had been pronounced dead during attempts to revive his heart in the ICU, prompting them to place him in the morgue until formalities were completed. Indeed, the grave was opened to wash Uncle Atiya, and as the washers poured warm water over his body, he began to open his eyes, unable to believe what he saw. He was so tired and exhausted that he simply went back to sleep. No one noticed that he had briefly opened his eyes. After being shrouded, everyone was shocked to see the body move. In fact, it sat up, leaving everyone incredulous at the scene. It turned out that the heart resuscitation efforts had succeeded, but they had succeeded after quite some time. Can you believe that Atiya spent an entire night in the morgue fridge and then came back to life? They say he fainted due to the extreme cold, and he woke up because of the warm water. And there's another story about a 33-year-old man who one day was having a meal as usual with his wife and children when he felt some pain in his heart. He went to the hospital to have it checked, but the doctors decided it was necessary to admit him to the ICU, where he remained for 2 days. On the third day, the doctor came out to announce the young man's death, leaving his family in shock. Relatives hurried to prepare for the funeral, necessitating the body to be placed in the morgue fridge for the entire night. After the washing and shrouding, all mourners left to place the deceased in his final resting place. As the grave was being opened and the young man lowered, everyone was shocked to see him suddenly stand up, emerging from his shroud. He sprinted as fast as he could, unaware that he was completely naked. The crowd chased after him, initially in a celebratory mood that turned into screams of joy. However, the joy was short-lived as the young man's heart gave out due to the strain of his sudden exertion, causing him to collapse dead in the middle of the road. It was later discovered that the young man had been mistakenly placed in the morgue fridge, despite being alive. He was suffering from a low heart rate that went unnoticed even by the monitoring equipment. When he regained consciousness and exerted himself running, his heart stopped for real this time. Another story is told by Ali Fawzi, who is still alive to this day at the age of 23. He recounts the incident when he was crossing the street and was hit by a car with great force, knocking him unconscious. Emergency services arrived and declared him dead after a doctor's examination. Without notifying his family, he was sent to the morgue fridge until his relatives could be reached. However, after 13 hours or more, Ali found himself in a box, feeling extreme cold and stiffness, thinking to himself, "It seems I have died. And now I awaken to confront my reality." I pushed off the cover to discover myself inside a fridge with several other boxes meant for the deceased. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Here, I decided to ascertain whether I had truly died or if I was still alive. I confirmed my vitality and screamed at the top of my lungs. Despite the guard being present, he didn't pay attention. It seems he was accustomed to such sounds, as he later claimed. I stepped out of the shelf and decided to explore the dark room with its numerous shelves. I attempted to reach the door, which consisted of 2 parts, one iron, and the other made of another metal. As the worker was about to open the door, he found me standing in front of it. He burst out of the fridge, and I ran after him until it became clear to everyone that I wasn't a ghost or a spectre, but indeed alive. And on to another story. After the completion of the childbirth process, the baby, Walid, was born underdeveloped. He was placed in the nursery alongside other infants. However, after 2 days, the responsible doctor announced to the parents that the baby had passed away. But due to the late hour, no one informed the parents. The baby was then placed in the fridge until morning. However, the truth was that the baby hadn't died. He was alive, as his father discovered when the doctor handed him over for burial. The baby sneezed in his father's hand, causing him to panic. It was assumed the baby had died, but in reality, he was alive. The father returned his child to another incubator. After extensive investigations, it was revealed that an error had occurred with the doctor. Typically, infants are injected with adrenaline, which can make their heartbeats very weak and almost inaudible at times. During a routine examination, the doctor announced the baby's death, but he was actually alive. The next story is narrated by the couple Nissan and Heeds, who went through a period of time where they completed their marriage and decided to head to an area in California for their honeymoon, where the refreshing water and beautiful beaches awaited them. It was an area not too far from their home, just 3 hours by car. Nissan and Heeds prepared and set off on their journey. However, the road passed through a forest and some narrow, winding roads. They had been driving for about 2 hours, when suddenly, the place was engulfed in thick fog, prompting them to slow down the car, especially as they navigated through the narrow forest roads, fearing a collision. Suddenly, a girl appeared on the road, signaling for them to stop and give her a ride. Heeds insisted on ignoring her, but Nissan was determined to go back and offer the girl a ride to take her to the nearest place she wanted to go. He indeed returned to the girl, who appeared to be in her 20s, and she asked them to take her on their way. She informed them that they would drive about 10 kilometers and then they would find a crossroads, and there they would find a gas station near a White House, which was her home. As they drove, Nissan tried to talk to the girl, but she remained silent and calm. He continued driving for about half an hour until they reached the crossroads as the girl had described. There, they found the very old and seemingly abandoned gas station. Nissan drove a little further and saw the White House. He addressed the girl, telling her that they had arrived, but there was no response. Heeds quickly turned around and saw the expression of extreme fear and horror on her face. She exclaimed, "The girl has disappeared!" How did she disappear when she hadn't even left the car? They were struck with intense fear. Suddenly, at a close distance, they saw an elderly couple. Nissan advanced the car towards them and stopped beside them. However, they were in bad shape. Heeds took over the conversation, informing the couple about the girl who had stopped them on the road. She was wearing white clothes and seemed to be in her 20s. She asked for a ride to the White House, but then she disappeared. The elderly couple began to ease their worries and told them that she was Diana, their daughter, who was indeed 20 years old and had died in a car accident on that road. The culprit had not been caught yet, and most people who passed through that road experienced what they had gone through. It seemed that the disturbances would not cease until the perpetrator of the accident was found and punished. The elderly couple invited them for a cup of tea, but Nissan was still under shock and politely declined. He informed them that they were supposed to be on their way for their honeymoon, and it was getting late. They should continue their journey. One of the young men recounted that he was responsible for a morgue at one of the hospitals located along the road. He had a strong, steel-like heart. He wasn't easily frightened. One night, while he was on duty, sitting at his desk finishing up some paperwork, the power suddenly went out for a few minutes. When it came back, he was frozen in place, bewildered and terrified. In front of him, all the corpses in the morgue drawers were sitting up, smiling mockingly. The young man remained in a state of shock. The power returned after a very short blackout. But when it went out again, the young man found everything had returned to normal. He kept telling and retelling his story, and only a few believed him about the corpses that came back to life after the power outage. The sound of the hospital cart pierced the silence of the night as the travelers were pushed through the long corridor towards the morgue room. The guard must have known they brought in a new body, so the paramedics greeted him, saying, "Good evening, sir. This is a woman's body. Preserve it in the fridge until morning, and we'll take it to the morgue." The guard asked for the deceased's name and the cause of death to note it in the records. The paramedics replied, "We truly don't know her identity or the cause of her death. We received a report of a murder, and we transported her, but she died on the way." The guard wrote down, "Unknown name, cause of death unknown, gender, female," and then he placed the body in the fridge, wrapped in a white sheet. After the paramedics left, the guard remembered that he had forgotten his clothes in the laundry and needed to inform his wife to dry them. He took out his phone and made the call, but he heard the ringing sound of a phone leaking from inside the morgue fridge. He panicked, realizing there was no one else in the room besides him, and everyone in there was dead. He strained to hear the phone, wondering where it was coming from. Then, he found it next to the body of the woman brought in by the paramedics that night. The narrator recalls that his heart almost stopped from the sheer panic and fear. His anxiety and fear intensified as he gathered his courage and wondered to himself, "Could it be my wife? Is that possible?" Tears welled up in his eyes as he remembered all the beautiful moments he had shared with her. Now, it seemed that death had decided to separate him from his beloved. As our guard hesitantly approached the fridge and swiftly opened it, his eyes fixated on the woman's face, tears still streaming from his eyes. But the lightning bolt that struck him was that the woman wasn't his wife. Suspicion began to course through his veins like shattered glass, and questions plagued his mind. How did my wife's phone end up with this woman? Who is she? What is happening? What is happening? Our guard was on the brink of madness, with the incessant questions swirling in his mind, all unanswered. He promptly informed the authorities and some leaders to investigate this perplexing case, which nearly drove him to madness. When all the leaders arrived, he quickly excused himself and rushed home to see his wife. Upon his return, he found her peacefully asleep, completely unaware of the chaos that had transpired. Fright and longing filled him as he embraced her as if he hadn't seen her in a long time. She was startled and said, "What's wrong, my dear husband? What happened?" She burst into tears and cried harder with each word she spoke. She fetched him a glass of water. He cut her off and said, "Don't worry, God is with us." Her response surprised him, and suspicion started to creep in even more. It was as if his wife was hiding something. She said, "My dear husband, I was robbed. A stranger approached me, asking for money. I gave her what I had, then she came back again, asking for more. She even asked if she could make a phone call to you because her husband is sick and hospitalized, and she doesn't have a phone. I allowed her, but she didn't even complete a minute, and when I turned around she was gone. Oh, my dear husband, I'm so sad, not because of the theft, but because I was kind to her. She deceived me, asking for charity, and I gave it to her. She stole from me. Out of shock, I said, God is my sufficiency, and He is the best disposer of affairs. I returned home filled with immense sadness over the woman's actions. Before going to sleep, I prayed to God, acknowledging my righteousness to the best of my ability. If I ever angered Him, He is merciful, and if He forgave me and bestowed His blessings upon me, He is generous. O God, that woman deceived me, and I acted kindly. I entrust my affairs to You, for You are the just judge. Then she drifted off to sleep, and here all the truth became clear. In the morning, the guard went to his workplace and inquired. In the latest investigations regarding that woman, one of the detectives told him that this woman had been deceived by 3 individuals. The guard asked, "What's the story?" They replied, "These 3 individuals who were apprehended confessed to everything. They said this woman approached us asking for money, so we flirted with her. When she didn't refuse, she came with us, and we went to one of our houses. We drank until we couldn't remember our names from the alcohol, and we did what we did. But we got rid of her and looted everything she had." The guard asked the detective, "Why didn't they steal the mobile phone?" He replied, "When she asked them about it, they found the phone among her belongings. Before any of them touched it, the phone started reciting verses loudly, saying, 'Seek forgiveness from your Lord. Seek forgiveness from your Lord.' They were terrified by those words, and it struck them like lightning. So they came to surrender themselves and confessed to everything they had done." The guard returned to his wife and told her what had happened. He said, "Allah heard your call and took revenge from her in the best way. But my dear wife, it was more than just a theft." The wife said, "You spoke the truth, and Allah the Almighty speaks the truth, and your Lord does not wrong anyone."